What would you do if the man you loved, the man you trusted, was the one who betrayed you? What if the truth about the crime you confessed to was far worse than you ever imagined? The moment I thought I had finally hit rock bottom, the real nightmare began. The man I had fallen for, the man I thought was my savior, had set me up. He manipulated me, used me as a pawn in his twisted game. And now, everything was unraveling. The truth was closer than I realized, and it was far more dangerous than I ever could have imagined. The phone call came just after I hung up with the officer. My heart was pounding, and the room around me felt like it was closing in. I could barely focus on the words coming from the other end of the line. "Sarah," the officer's voice crackled. "You need to get down here. It's about Daniel and Jessica. We found something in her apartment, something big." I didn't need any more explanation. I was already out the door, heading to the station. My mind was spinning. Was Daniel the killer? Had the truth about his involvement finally come to light? What did this discovery mean for me? Would it clear my name or destroy the last shreds of my life? When I arrived at the station, the officer led me to a back room. He looked exhausted, his eyes sunken as if he hadn't slept in days. He motioned for me to sit. "We've found something disturbing," he said, his voice low. I sat down, my hands shaking as I braced myself for whatever he was about to say. "You remember the sketch of the man who was seen leaving the scene?" he asked. "Well, it turns out that man is someone you know very well, someone much closer to you than you realized." My stomach churned as I tried to follow his words. The sketch had been a rough depiction of the man seen leaving Jessica's apartment, but I never imagined it would be someone I knew. It didn't make sense. Who could it be? "Who?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The officer pulled out a file from his desk and slid it toward me. I opened it, my breath catching in my throat when I saw the photo inside. It was Daniel. I stared at the picture, frozen in disbelief. This wasn't possible. The man I had trusted, the man I had fallen for. How could he be involved in all of this? The officer continued. "Daniel had been seeing Jessica for months before her death. We've uncovered a hidden connection between them, something he'd been keeping secret." My mind raced as the officer explained the full scope of the investigation. Daniel had been involved with Jessica long before I ever met him. They had a history, one that was buried beneath layers of deceit. Daniel had been using me to cover up his past with Jessica, a woman he had been having an affair with for months. And now, it seemed like their relationship had turned dark. "Daniel and Jessica had a falling out just days before the murder," the officer said. "Jessica had found out something about Daniel's past, something he didn't want anyone to know. And that's why she was killed." "But I don't understand," I said, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me. "Why would he kill her?" The officer looked at me gravely. "Because she knew too much. She knew something that could have destroyed him. And in the end, she paid the price." I was in shock. I had never imagined that Daniel could be capable of something like this. My mind was reeling, struggling to piece together the fragments of a life I thought I understood. And then, the officer dropped the final bombshell. Daniel wasn't just involved with Jessica. He was the one who planted the evidence that led the police to you. I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Daniel knew you'd be the perfect scapegoat," the officer explained. "He knew you'd confess to something you didn't do, and he used that confession to hide his tracks. He planted the clues that led us to believe you were guilty, and he knew you'd be caught in the lie." My world seemed to implode as the pieces finally clicked into place. Daniel hadn't just been a bystander in my life. He had been manipulating me from the start. He used my fear, my guilt, and my weakness to frame me for a crime I had no part in. He knew exactly what he was doing when he made sure I was at the center of it all. I needed to see him. I needed to confront Daniel, to make him look me in the eye and admit what he had done. I had already lost so much because of him, and I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I drove to his apartment, my hands gripped tightly on the wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew this was the moment everything would change. I had no idea what I would say or what he would do, but I couldn't leave things like this. When I knocked on his door, I heard movement inside. He opened the door slowly, his face a mix of surprise and wariness. "Sarah," he started, his voice cold and detached. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pushed past him and stepped inside. my eyes never leaving his. "You used me," I said, the words finally escaping my lips. "You used my fear, my guilt, to get away with murder. You framed me." Daniel's expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced with something colder. "You don't understand, Sarah," he said, his voice tight. "I didn't want it to go this far, but you don't know what she was going to do. She was going to ruin everything for me." I could feel my chest tightening with anger, but I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at him, waiting for him to continue. He took a deep breath and closed the door behind me. "I didn't kill her," he said quietly, "but I had to make sure she didn't destroy my life, and the only way to do that was to make sure you took the fall for it." My heart pounded as I tried to process his words. He hadn't killed her? Then who had? What was the truth? But before I could ask any more questions, Daniel stepped forward, his face filled with anger. "Leave, Sarah," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've caused enough trouble. If you want to live, you'll leave me alone." I turned and walked out of his apartment, my mind spinning. I knew I had just uncovered something far darker than I could ever have imagined. But the real question remained. Who killed Jessica Hayes? And why? The truth was finally within my reach, but the one question that kept haunting me was unanswered. Who killed Jessica? And more importantly, was I the next target? The final piece of the puzzle is still missing. Will the real killer be found, or is someone else still out there, watching, waiting? The truth will be revealed. Subscribe to Truth Diaries to get the final twist in this shocking story. I had no choice but to trust the police. They had been working tirelessly to figure out who the real killer was, and with the evidence from Daniel's apartment, they started piecing things together. But even then, nothing made sense. The more they dug into Daniel's life, the more questions surfaced. Why had he been so involved in this? And why had he framed me when the real killer was still out there? But in a strange twist of fate, the breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Jessica's former roommate, who had come forward after hearing the media reports. She confessed that Jessica had been scared of someone she had met a few months before the murder. Jessica had told her everything about a mysterious man who had threatened her. That's when it clicked. It wasn't Daniel who had killed Jessica. It wasn't even a random stranger. The real killer was someone much closer to me. Someone I never would have suspected. The killer was Tom, my husband. I still couldn't believe it. As the investigation continued, the detectives discovered that Tom had been having an affair with Jessica. A deep, passionate affair that had been going on for months before the murder. When Jessica found out that Tom was still married and had been lying to her about leaving me, she threatened to expose everything. She had already started gathering evidence. She planned to ruin his career, his family, his reputation. Tom couldn't let that happen. He had worked too hard to build the perfect life with me, a perfect life that was built on lies. The last thing he wanted was for that to all unravel. Jessica had been blackmailing him, using her knowledge of his affair to get what she wanted. And when she finally pushed too hard, when she refused to let up, Tom snapped. The night Jessica was killed, Tom went to her apartment to confront her. She had planned to meet with him, to demand a settlement for her silence, and Tom had finally lost his temper. What started as a heated argument turned into a brutal, violent fight. In his rage, Tom grabbed a knife from Jessica's kitchen and ended her life. The police had been right about one thing. There was a witness. The neighbor had seen a man matching Tom's description leaving the apartment. Tom had been careless, too caught up in his own lies, thinking that he could get away with it. And when Jessica's body was found, Tom thought the best way to avoid suspicion was to frame me. He knew I was the one person who could take the fall. He knew about my affair with Daniel and my emotional state, and he used that to his advantage. He knew I had confessed to something I didn't do. He knew I had been trying to bury my guilt, and he knew that if I confessed to the crime, everyone would believe me. I was numb when the police came to arrest Tom. The man I had loved for years, the father of my children, the man who had built a life with me, was now a murderer. They said they had enough evidence to charge him with first-level murder. It was only when I stood face to face with him as he was being led away in handcuffs that the reality truly hit me. Tom looked at me with the same cold, calculating eyes I had seen in the mirror so many times. But this time, there was no hiding the truth. He knew I knew. "You'll never tell anyone, Sarah," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Menacingly, "You'll never tell anyone that you were just as guilty as I am." For the first time in years, I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted. He was a stranger now. And in that moment, I realized that I had been living a lie all along. Tom's confession, in the end, wasn't a surprise. But the truth, the full truth, was something that shattered me. Jessica had known everything, but she had refused to be silenced by Tom's threats. She had taken the power back from him, and that was the final mistake that cost her life. As for me, I couldn't help but wonder how many more lies I had told myself, how many truths I had buried just to keep my world intact. But now, I had nothing left to hide. The truth had set me free. But at what cost? I never imagined that the man I had called my husband could be capable of something so horrific. But sometimes, the real monsters are the ones closest to you. And the hardest part is realizing that they were never who you thought they were. Sometimes, we think we know the people closest to us, but sometimes, the truth is far darker than we could ever imagine. If this story made you think about the lies we live and the truth we hide, hit subscribe. Like and comment your thought. This was just one story from a world of secrets and confessions. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Because sometimes, the truth is just the beginning.